During dinner, my husband confessed he had terminal pancreatic cancer. The next morning, a lawyer showed up with a stack of experimental cancer treatment documents and told me to sign them just so the hospital could approve the treatment. 72 hours after my husband died, my son returned to the house with his wife and the same lawyer and said, "Before we begin, I need to ask you something. Have you ever discovered a truth that completely changed everything you thought you knew, yes or no? Drop a comment and let me know." I read every single one. Quick note: some details in this story have been fictionalized for reflection and storytelling. What matters most is the message it carries. There is a particular silence that fills a house when the person you've trusted for 31 years walks through the door carrying a lie so large it will erase you. I didn't know that yet, sitting at our Lincoln Park kitchen table that October evening, my laptop screen glowing with 63 green dots moving across interstate highways. At 62, I had spent 31 years building a transportation empire from a single flatbed truck, keeping every ledger, knowing every route. Every morning for 20 years, I had monitored that GPS fleet before dawn. It was a ritual, like breathing. Luther came home at 7 that Monday evening. I heard his car in the driveway, the familiar rhythm of his footsteps, the turn of the key. But when the door opened, I looked up and saw a face I'd never seen in 31 years of marriage. Luther, at 64, had always been the kind of man who believed Advil and sleep could cure anything. He'd gone to the doctor that afternoon for what he called a routine checkup, the kind of appointment I'd been nagging him to schedule for 3 years. "How did it go?" I asked, closing my laptop. He set his keys on the counter. "Fine. Not grief exactly. Not fear. Something else, the look of a man weighing one last chance to turn back." "Luther, what did they say?" He walked to the kitchen window and stood there, staring out at the backyard we'd tended together for 23 years. The oak tree we'd planted when Hayes was 12. The flower beds I weeded every spring. He kept his back to me. "They want me to see a specialist next week." The words hung in the air between us. In 31 years of marriage, Luther had never used the phrase, "see a specialist." He was a man who powered through flu seasons, who'd once driven a truck for 18 hours with a broken finger. The wrongness of it settled into my chest like ice. A specialist for what? They found something in the blood work. His reflection in the window showed no expression. Probably nothing. I stood and crossed to him, putting my hand on his shoulder. He flinched just slightly, but I felt it. "What kind of specialist?" "Oncologist." The word dropped like a stone into still water. I felt the ripples spread through my body, cold and expanding. "Luther, look at me." He turned, and for a moment I saw something flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by exhaustion. "I'm sure it's nothing," he said. "They just want to rule things out." I had learned to read Luther the way you learn to read weather, 31 years of small signs adding up to prediction. The way he folded his newspaper meant he was thinking about expansion. The way he hummed while shaving meant the quarterly numbers were good. The way he went quiet over dinner meant a driver had quit. That night, every sign pointed to storm. But I didn't know storms could be manufactured. For 2 weeks, I watched him move through the house like a ghost. He took the specialist appointment alone, said he didn't want me to waste a day sitting in waiting rooms. I let him go because in 31 years, Luther had earned my trust in 10,000 small ways. I made his favorite meals. I didn't push when he went quiet. I gave him the space I thought he needed. The afternoon he came back from the specialist, I was folding laundry in the living room. I heard the front door open and close, heard him set his keys down, heard his footsteps stop in the doorway. When I looked up, he was holding a manila folder. "We need to talk," he said. He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the coffee table between us. The label read, "Patient Garrison Luther James." His hands were shaking. "Stage 4, he said. His voice cracked on the words. "Pancreatic." I set down the shirt I was folding. The room tilted sideways. I heard myself ask, "Are they sure?" He opened the folder and pushed it toward me. I saw the hospital letterhead, the neat typed lines, the signature at the bottom, Dr. Forrest Mercer Oncology. The hospital seal was raised and official. How long? I asked. Luther looked at the floor. They said 6 months, maybe less. You need to understand something about trust in a long marriage. It's not built in grand moments, but in 10,000 mornings of coffee, made the way you like it in knowing which silence means peace and which means pain. I thought I knew every silence Luther carried. I thought I had earned the right to believe him, to trust that the man who'd built a business with me, who'd raised a son with me, who'd woken up beside me for 11,000 mornings, wouldn't look me in the eye and weaponize 31 years of faithfulness against me. I didn't know that Dr. Mercer had signed those documents for money. I didn't know the diagnosis was a performance. I didn't know that Luther's tears, the first tears I'd seen from him in 31 years of marriage, were the only real thing in the room, and that he was crying, not because he was dying, but because he'd chosen this and couldn't take it back. I moved to sit beside him. I wrapped my arms around his shoulders while he pressed his face against my neck and sobbed. His body shook with it, with something that felt like grief, but tasted like guilt. "We'll fight this," I said into his hair. "Together. Whatever it takes." He nodded against my shoulder. I felt his tears soak through my shirt, warm and wet and utterly convincing. The medical folder sat on the table between us, Dr. Forrest Mercer's signature neat across the bottom. I believed every word. That was my only mistake, not that I believed him, but that I'd earned the right to believe him for 31 years, and he used that against me. 3 days later, a man I'd never met would arrive at our door with a stack of papers and a smile I didn't yet know how to read. The doorbell rang at 7:30 on a Thursday night, 3 days after the diagnosis, and the man on the other side carried a leather briefcase and a smile that would cost me everything. Preston Dalton, 50, and wearing a suit too expensive for a house call, introduced himself as the medical center's administrative attorney. He shook my hand with practiced warmth. "I apologize for the late hour, Mrs. Garrison," he said. "But the trial enrollment has a tight timeline, and there are documents we need to process before Mr. Garrison can begin treatment." Luther appeared behind me, his hand on my shoulder. "This is the attorney I mentioned, from the Nevada facility." I stepped aside and let Preston into our home. We sat at the dining table, the same table where Luther and I had reviewed quarterly reports for 20 years. Preston opened his briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers, placing them neatly in front of me. "Mrs. Garrison, this is purely administrative," Preston said. His voice had the practiced calm of someone who'd said these exact words before. "The trial facility requires clean financial documentation to avoid any federal complications. We need to transfer asset management to a single entity standard procedure for experimental treatment programs." I looked at Luther. His face was pale, exhausted. The face of a dying man who needed me to trust him one more time. "What happens if I don't sign?" I asked. Preston glanced at Luther, then back to me. "The trial enrollment would be delayed, possibly denied." "How do I know this is legitimate?" Preston smiled, patient understanding. "I'm a licensed attorney in both Illinois and Nevada. My bar number is on the letterhead. The medical center's contact information is at the top of each page. You're welcome to call and verify before signing." It was the smoothness that should have warned me. The way he answered each question without hesitation, without consulting notes, without the slightest pause. He'd rehearsed this. I just didn't know it yet. "Where do I sign?" I asked. 14 pages. I signed every one without reading past the headers. Medical power of attorney, asset protection trust, financial designee authorization. Preston pointed to each signature line handed me. The pen watched me write my name again and again. Luther sat beside me the entire time, his hand on my back. When I finished the last page, Preston gathered the documents and notarized each signature himself, pressing his official seal into the paper with a small thump. He was committing federal fraud while I watched, and I had no idea. "Thank you, Mrs. Garrison," Preston said, sliding the papers back into his briefcase. "This will make everything much easier for both of you." Luther walked him to the door. I heard them talking in low voices in the entryway, but I couldn't make out the words. Here's what I didn't know that night, signing page after page, while Preston watched with patient eyes buried between the medical power of attorney and the Asset Protection Trust, was a divorce petition with my signature notarized by the same man who'd placed the pen in my hand. Luther left for Nevada the following Monday morning. I drove him to O'Hare before dawn, kissed him goodbye at the departure gate, watched him disappear into the terminal with his overnight bag. He didn't look back. For the next 8 weeks, I lived through 4-minute video calls. Luther appeared on my laptop screen 3 times a week, always in a patient gown, always against the same sterile white wall. By the second week, his head was shaved. By the fourth week, his skin had taken on a grayish pallor. The hollow look in his eyes grew deeper with each call. "I can't talk long tonight," he said in the third week. His voice through the laptop speaker sounded hollow, far-away distance I attributed to illness, rather than deception. "They're adjusting medications. How do you feel?" I asked. "Tired. The treatment is aggressive." I sent care packages, his favorite books, wool socks, homemade cookies. Every package came back marked, "Return to Sender Quarantine Protocol." I asked for a nurse's contact number so I could get updates. Luther said FDA confidentiality rules prevented any outside communication. "Luther let me fly out," I said in week 5. "I can stay at a hotel nearby." "No." His response was immediate, firm. "FDA rules. No visitors during active treatment phase." I believed him because I had no reason not to. By week 6, I had memorized the angle of the laptop camera in his room, the beige wall behind his left shoulder, the way his hand shook, reaching for water. I was studying a stage set, cataloging props, believing I was witnessing my husband's decline. The calls grew shorter. Week 7, 3 minutes. Week 8, 4 minutes. That last call, Luther looked directly into the camera. His face filled the screen, and I could see every line, every shadow under his eyes. "You're the best person I've ever known," he said. The words should have sounded like love. Instead, they hit me like ice water. I opened my mouth to respond, but the screen went black. I sat staring at my reflection in the dark laptop screen. Luther's last sentence echoed in the empty kitchen. I felt cold. Not sad. Cold. A chill that started at the base of my spine and spread through my chest like frost. I didn't understand what my body was trying to tell me. I didn't understand that I'd just heard goodbye disguised as affection. I didn't understand that the man I'd held while he cried, the man I'd signed away everything to save, was already gone, not dead, but disappeared, erased, living another life, while I sat in our kitchen waiting for the next call that would never come. I wouldn't hear his voice again until the phone call that came on the first morning of the new year. The phone rang at 7:15 on the first morning of the new year, and the voice on the other end was too calm to be delivering the kind of news that erases a life. I was making coffee in the kitchen, the same morning ritual I'd performed alone for 8 weeks. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar Nevada area code. "Mrs. Garrison, I'm calling from the clinical trial facility." A woman's voice, professional and smooth. "I'm very sorry to inform you that your husband passed away at 3 o'clock this morning from anaphylactic shock." The coffee pot gurgled behind me. Steam rose from the cup in my hand. I heard the words, but they landed somewhere outside my body. "What?" The trial medication triggered a severe allergic reaction. The medical team did everything possible, but the response was immediate and catastrophic. The risks were explained in the consent forms Mr. Garrison signed before treatment began. Her voice had the practiced neutrality of someone who'd made this call before. No pause for my grief. No space for questions. Just procedural efficiency, like she was canceling an appointment. "I need to see him," I said. "I'm flying out today." "I'm afraid that won't be possible." Her tone didn't change. Federal biosafety regulations require immediate cremation due to the experimental compounds involved in the trial. The medication contained radioactive isotopes. By law, cremation must occur within 12 hours of death. "You're telling me my husband died 4 hours ago and you've already..." The urn will arrive in 3 to 5 business days via secure courier. Again, Mrs. Garrison, we are very sorry for your loss. The line went dead. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone in one hand and a coffee cup in the other, and I felt nothing. Not grief, not shock. Just a strange, hollow blankness. 3 days later, on January 4th, the doorbell rang at 2 in the afternoon. The UPS driver stood on my porch holding a box small enough to fit under one arm. Standard cardboard shipping box. That's him, I asked. The driver glanced at his scanner. Pearl Garrison. I nodded. Sign here, please. I signed. He handed me the box and walked back to his truck. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table. The label read, Cremated Remains, Handle with Care. I opened it carefully, pulling apart the packing tape. Inside was a gray metal urn, plain, industrial. The urn weighed less than a bag of flour. I set it on the mantel and realized I was holding my husband in one hand while making coffee with the other. I placed it where Luther used to keep his morning coffee cup, in the spot where he'd stand looking out the front window every Sunday morning for 23 years. The urn looked small there, insignificant. A man reduced to metal and ash. I didn't know whose ashes they really were. I stood there for a long time, staring at the urn, trying to feel something. Grief, anger, loss. But there was only that same hollow blankness, like my body knew something my mind refused to accept. 4 days later, the doorbell rang at 8 in the morning. I opened the door and found Preston Dalton standing on my porch. No expensive suit this time, just casual clothes and a thin manila envelope. No smile, no practiced warmth. Mrs. Garrison. His voice was flat professional. You're required to vacate this property within 48 hours. I stared at him. What? He held out the envelope. Court order. This house has been legally transferred to a new designee as of November 7th. You have 2 days to remove your personal belongings. This is my house. My voice sounded strange in my own ears. Luther and I bought this house in 1991. The property was legally transferred under a notarized division agreement filed with Cook County Court on November 7th. Preston repeated, his voice carrying the flat finality of someone reading from a script. I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. I don't understand. The documents are clear, Mrs. Garrison. You signed the property transfer agreement on November 4th. I notarized your signature. The filing was processed 3 days later. Everything is legal and binding. I opened the envelope and pulled out the papers. Legal letterhead, court stamps, official seals. I flipped through the pages: property description, legal boundaries, transfer terms. On the last page, I saw my signature. My handwriting, my pen strokes. The date, November 4th, 2022. You should understand something about signatures. We sign 1,000 documents in a lifetime without reading them because we trust the person handing us the pen. That trust is what they needed. That trust was the whole point. That's my signature, I said, staring at the bottom of page 14. I remembered signing. Remembered Preston's voice explaining federal tax complications, medical trial requirements, asset protection. I remembered Luther sitting beside me, his hand on my back. I didn't remember signing this. I have a right to appeal, I said. Preston's expression didn't change. You can file a motion with the court, but the property transfer is complete and legally binding. The current owner has requested immediate possession. 48 hours, Mrs. Garrison. He turned and walked back to his car. I stood at the front door, the eviction notice still in my hand, watching his car disappear around the corner, the same corner where I'd watched Luther's taxi vanish 9 weeks earlier. 48 hours to leave the house we'd built a life in for 31 years. I had nowhere to go, a metal urn full of ashes that weren't my husband, and my own signature at the bottom of the document that made me homeless. That night, I would sleep in the place where everything changes, the cold storage shed behind a house that was no longer mine. The storage shed behind the house I no longer owned was 8 degrees below freezing, and I had nowhere else to go. I opened the door at 10 that night and stepped into darkness that smelled like dust and the particular abandonment of things no longer used, but not yet thrown away. The beam from my phone flashlight cut through the space, illuminating stacks of cardboard boxes and old lawnmower plastic bins full of Christmas decorations accumulated over 31 years. Calling Hayes at 10 p.m. and asking my son to pick me up was something I'd never done in my life. I decided not to do it tonight. I moved through the shed searching for something to keep me warm. There in the back corner behind a stack of paint cans, I found what I was looking for. An old wool blanket we'd used for summer concerts in Millennium Park. I pulled it out, and beneath it, hanging on a hook I'd forgotten existed, was Luther's winter coat. The heavy black one he'd worn every day for 10 years, the one he'd left behind when he went to Nevada saying he wouldn't need Chicago winter clothes in the desert. I took it off the hook and put it on. It still smelled like him coffee and that aftershave he'd used since before we were married. The scent hit me harder than I expected. I shoved my hands into the pockets for warmth. The right pocket was empty. But when I reached into the left pocket, my fingers found the torn lining, the same tear Luther had complained about last winter, saying he needed to get it repaired, but never did. My hand went through the tear and touched something hard. I pulled it out carefully. A small black USB drive, unbranded. So tiny I had to hold it close to my phone's flashlight to be certain it was real. A USB drive. In Luther's coat. Hidden in a torn lining like something he didn't want found, but couldn't bear to destroy. I turned it over in my palm. It weighed almost nothing. No laptop in the shed. No way to see what was on it. But every instinct in my body, the same instinct that had sent cold down my spine during Luther's last video call, told me this mattered. I sat on the shed floor clutching the USB drive until 5:45 a.m. when the sky began to gray. That small piece of plastic was either nothing or everything. There was no middle possibility. I'd slept maybe 2 hours curled on the concrete floor in Luther's coat with the wool blanket wrapped around me. My back ached. My fingers were numb, but I was functional. At 5:45, I walked to my car, got in, and turned the heater on full blast. I kept a laptop in the trunk for checking GPS coordinates when drivers called with route questions. I pulled it out and waited for the screen to glow to life. At 6 o'clock exactly, I plugged in the USB drive. 3 folders appeared, labeled simply Audio, Documents, Photos. I opened audio first. Luther's voice filled my car. She didn't read a single page, not one. Preston said she just kept asking if it would help me get into the trial. Background noise, a woman laughing. Sloan. God, Luther. Sloane's voice warm with affection. You're terrible. I'm practical. More laughter. Panama by March, that's the plan. Your passport's ready June, but we don't wait that long if the money clears. And if it doesn't, it will. The shell company cleared the first transfers 3 days ago. Starlight Logistics. Clean Delaware registration. By the time anyone looks, we're gone. I sat very still, my hand frozen on the mouse. Does she suspect anything? Sloane asked. Pearl. Luther's voice carried the easy dismissal of someone discussing weather. No, she trusts me. She's trusted me for 31 years. That's the whole point. I played the audio 3 times. Not because I didn't believe it the first time. Because I needed to hear my husband's laugh, the one I'd heard 10,000 mornings over coffee, used as the sound of my erasure. I opened the documents folder next. Starlight Logistics, LLC. Articles of Incorporation filed in Delaware. A list of transactions, 14 transfers over 6 months, ranging from $800,000 to $2 million each. Total $18 million. Assets stripped systematically from the transportation company I'd helped build, moved to a shell company I'd never heard of, registered in Luther's name only. The dates told the story. First transfer, July 2022, 3 months before the diagnosis. This wasn't desperation. This was planned. I opened photos last. Screenshots, dated, time-stamped. Luther and Sloane at a resort Costa Rica according to the geotag. Poolside, drinks with umbrellas. His arm around her shoulders. Her head tilted toward his. Date on the photos, October 2nd, 2022. 3 weeks before Luther came home from his routine checkup and told me he was dying. There are kinds of pain that don't produce tears because they're too large for the body's language of grief. They just sit quietly in your chest, cold and patient, waiting to be transmuted into something useful. I sat in my car until 9 in the morning watching the USB files on my laptop screen while Chicago woke up around me. Commuters passed on the street. Coffee shops opened their doors. The city continued as if nothing had changed. But something fundamental had shifted in the hours between finding that USB drive and watching the sunrise. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was calculating. The USB had been hidden in Luther's coat, not accidentally dropped, but deliberately concealed. He'd kept insurance, evidence, protection against Sloane, probably in case she betrayed him first. His paranoia about partners had given me a weapon. I reached for my phone. The call I was about to make would bring my son into a conspiracy he didn't yet know existed and make him choose a side. The phone rang twice before my son answered, and the first words I said were the truest thing I'd spoken in 9 weeks. "I need you home right now, and don't tell anyone." "Mom, are you okay?" Hayes's voice carried immediate concern. Not panic, just the quiet alertness of someone who knew his mother didn't make calls like this. "No," I said, "but I will be. How fast can you get here?" "Where are you?" I gave him the address of a deserted road in Evanston, far from anyone who might recognize either of us. "Within the hour," he said. "I'm coming now." He arrived in 53 minutes. I watched his car pull up behind mine on the empty road, watched him get out and walk toward my passenger door. When he slid into the seat beside me, I saw Luther's eyes looking at me from my son's face, a fact that had never hurt me until this moment. "What happened?" he asked. I handed him my laptop. "Listen." I pressed play on the audio file. Luther's voice filled the car. "She didn't read a single page. Not one. Preston said she just kept asking if it would help me get into the trial." Background laughter. Sloane's voice warm with affection. "God, Luther, you're terrible." "I'm practical. Panama by March, that's the plan." Hayes listened to the entire audio without interrupting. I watched his face. When Luther's laugh came through the car speakers, the same laugh I'd heard over coffee every morning for 31 years, I watched my son's jaw tighten the way his father's used to. When the audio ended, I showed him the documents. Starlight Logistics, LLC, the transactions. The Costa Rica photos dated 3 weeks before the diagnosis. Hayes stared at the screen for a long time. Then he pulled out his phone and started typing without speaking. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Checking something." His fingers moved across the screen. "Dad never closed one of his credit card accounts, the secondary one he gave me in college. I still have access." He pulled up a banking app. Logged in, navigated to transaction history. "Dad's not dead." Hayes turned the phone screen toward me. "River North Convenience Store, 3 days ago. He's in Chicago." The world tilted sideways. Not dead. Not in Panama. Here. In the city we'd lived in together for 31 years, probably within 10 miles of where I'd slept on a storage shed floor. My son Hayes, 35, and working in real estate, had his father's eyes, a fact that had never hurt me until the moment he sat in my car reading Luther's credit card transactions, proving his father was alive. "What do you need?" Hayes asked. His voice was steady, controlled. The voice of someone who'd just chosen a side. "If a lawyer," and I said, "the best one you know." 48 hours later, Hayes brought me to Celeste Thornton's office. 22nd floor, downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The kind of office that cost money to maintain and declared competence before a word was spoken. Celeste Thornton, 58 and commanding the space behind her desk, didn't stand when we entered. She gestured to the 2 chairs across from her. "Mrs. Garrison, no condolences, no small talk. Show me what you have." I handed her the USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop and played the audio once. Read through the Starlight LLC documents. Mapped the credit card transactions on her screen. 10 minutes of silence while she worked her face expressionless. Then she looked up. I've been doing this for 20 years, she said. I've never lost. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same neutrality someone might use to report the weather. Can we get the money back? I asked. Yes. Can we prove fraud? Yes. Can we make sure he goes to prison? Celeste leaned back in her chair. That depends on how you want to proceed. There are legal channels slow, public, messy, or there are strategic channels faster, controlled, with better outcomes. You need to understand something about lawyers. The good ones don't tell you everything will be fine. The good ones ask what you're willing to do, then build the map to get you there. Celeste was asking. What's the difference? I asked. Legal channels, you file charges the state prosecutes. You wait 2 years for a trial that might go either way. Strategic channels, we build the trap before we spring it. Control the narrative, ensure maximum damage with minimum risk. Strategic, I said. Good. Celeste pulled up a new document on her screen. Then we need to talk about what you really want. Do you want justice, or do you want revenge? I thought for exactly 1 second. Both if possible. Celeste smiled for the first time. Good. We can work with that. She stood and walked to the whiteboard mounted on her office wall, picked up a red marker. How long do you want this to take? She asked. I looked out the window at Chicago, spread below us the city where Luther thought he was hiding, the city that was about to become his trap. Before he gets away, I said. Celeste nodded and began to draw. What she drew on that whiteboard wasn't a legal defense, it was a battle plan. The first thing Celeste drew on the whiteboard wasn't a path to catch Luther, it was a cage to keep him from running. She stood with the red marker in her hand, drawing a large circle labeled $35 million contract in the center of the board. We don't catch him, not yet. She drew arrows pointing into the circle from multiple directions. We give him something so large he stays in place waiting for it. What kind of contract? Hayes asked. Interstate transportation. Fake, but convincing. $35 million over 3 years. Large enough that his greed overrides caution. Too large to walk away from. I watched her draw more circles around the center, smaller, connected. The contract requires his signature and yours together, Hayes. Father and son partnership. He'll want you on his side anyway. You give him what he already craves. Hayes shifted in his chair beside me. You want me to pretend I'm joining him? Yes. Act like I believe Dad's story, like I'm angry at Mom for... He stopped, his jaw tight. For what? Celeste asked. For whatever he told Sloane I should be angry about. Hayes's voice was flat, controlled. He'll have a script ready. A version where Mom's the villain and he's the victim. I pretend to believe it. Celeste set down the marker and turned to face us. Hayes, can you make your father believe you want to follow him? Can you play the son who's chosen his side? Hayes looked at me before answering. I saw something in his eyes, the same look Luther used to get when making impossible decisions about the business. The same calculation. The same willingness to do what needed doing. Yes, he said. I can do that. 3 words that cost him something I saw but couldn't name. Good. Celeste turned back to the whiteboard. The contract is the bait, but it takes time to build a federal case properly. We need him to stay in Chicago long enough for that case to be airtight. No escape routes, no technicalities, no mistakes. She drew a timeline along the bottom of the board marking months. I file with IRS criminal investigation tomorrow. They coordinate with FBI. Build the prosecution. 90 to 120 days minimum. 4 months, I said. Yes. 4 months where Luther thinks he's hiding and we're building the trap. Hayes sat beside me watching Celeste draw circles and arrows on the whiteboard mapping his father's trap. I wanted to tell him he didn't have to do this, but we both knew he did, and we both knew what it would cost him. The next morning, Celeste went to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division alone. She called me that afternoon from her office. It started. Meet me here in an hour. When I arrived, she was sitting at her desk with a stack of documents spread in front of her. Agent Roger Finch, she said by way of greeting. IRS Criminal Investigation. I gave him everything. The USB drive the shell company documents the audio confession. He listened once and said 3 words. This is complete. Agent Roger Finch of the IRS Criminal Investigation Division had reviewed the evidence with the methodical patience of someone who'd built 100 cases and lost none. I sat down across from her desk. What does that mean? It means we have a case. 90 to 120 days to coordinate with FBI and build the federal prosecution. Finch said they don't rush federal cases. They build them slowly and build them right. 4 months, I said again. Yes. Celeste pulled out a calendar marked with red circles. But there's a complication. Luther's fake passport. Well, what about it? I had a contact check. It expires June 15th. I felt something cold settle into my chest. That's his escape window? Yes. After June 15th, he either needs to renew risk he might get flagged, or he runs with what he has before it expires. My guess is he runs early. Maybe May. Maybe sooner if he gets spooked. I calculated in my head. January to June. 135 days, I said, from today. Can we do it? I asked. Build the case, set the trap, execute everything in 135 days. Celeste looked at me over her desk, her expression unreadable. We don't have a choice. After June 15th, he's gone. A federal investigation is like pouring concrete. It takes time to set, but once it does, nothing breaks it. We had 90 to 120 days of wet concrete. We needed it solid before Luther tried to run. What's the first step? I asked. Hayes makes contact. 1 week from now. I'll script it. He calls Luther, says he knows the truth, says he wants in. Luther will be suspicious at first. Hayes has to be convincing. He will be... I said. I thought about my son's face when Celeste asked if he could deceive his father. The cost in his eyes. The contract offer comes second. Celeste continued. After Luther believes Hayes is on his side, we need at least 3 weeks of build-up. Let Luther think Hayes discovered the fake death confronted you chose his father. Then Hayes offers the transportation contract as partnership. Father and son rebuilding together. What's my role? I asked. Victim, Celeste said without hesitation. Public victim. You file for death certificate correction. You make noise about the house eviction. You look like someone scrambling to survive, not someone building a case. Luther needs to think you're helpless. I stood and walked to the window. Chicago spread out below, the same view we'd looked at yesterday when Celeste first said the word revenge. I counted backwards from 135 days in my head. June 15th. Luther would run when his passport cleared, probably before. We had to finish this before he knew we'd even started. The only advantage we had was that right now, at this exact moment, Luther thought he'd won. 135 days. The first call to test that advantage would come from Hayes in a week, and every word would be scripted. Celeste handed Hayes a single page of typewritten lines and said, "Every word matters. This isn't a conversation, it's an audition for your father's trust." 1 week later, we sat in Hayes's car on the same deserted Evanston road where I'd first shown him the USB drive. The script was folded in Hayes's jacket pocket. He'd read it 50 times, memorized every word, every pause, every inflection Celeste had marked. It was 9:30 at night. Dark, cold. The kind of February night where your breath fogs the windows and every sound feels amplified. Hayes pulled out his phone and set it on the dashboard speaker mode. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. He dialed Luther's number, the old cell phone number that should have been disconnected when Luther died, but wasn't. The phone rang 3 times. Then Luther's voice. "Hello." Hayes took a breath. "Dad, it's me." Silence on the other end. Not the silence of disconnection. The silence of calculation. "Hayes." Luther's voice was careful. Neutral. "How did you get this number? Mom lost everything." Hayes's voice broke on the last word, half script, half real. "I don't have anyone. I want to follow you." I sat perfectly still in the passenger seat, watching my son's face in the dashboard light, listening to him lie to his father with my words in his mouth. 8 seconds of silence. I counted them. 1, 2, 3, 4. The longest 8 seconds of my life. 5, 6, 7, 8. Then Luther's voice. Do you know where I am? Testing. Always testing. I guess I know. Hayes stayed on script, his voice steady now. I know you. Another pause. Shorter this time. Call me again next week, Luther said. The line went dead. Hayes set the phone down on the dashboard and stared at it. His hands were shaking. I watched his fingers tremble against the steering wheel, and I understood for the first time that justice has its own kind of cruelty, not against the guilty, but against everyone who loves them. You did well, I said. He didn't believe me. Not yet, but he will. Hayes looked at me, and I saw Luther's eyes again, the same calculation, the same weighing of risk and reward. How many more calls? As many as it takes. And then what? Then he trusts you enough to meet, and we spring the trap. Hayes started the car. The heater kicked on, filling the silence. I hate him, Hayes said quietly, but I know. We drove back to the city without speaking. 1 week later, 3rd week of February, Hayes walked into Celeste's office carrying a manila folder I'd never seen before. I hired someone, he said, pushing the folder across Celeste's desk. A private investigator. I wanted to know who Sloan really is. Celeste opened the folder and began reading. I watched her face looking for reaction, but she gave nothing away. After 5 minutes, she looked up. Sloan Whitfield isn't her name, Celeste said. It's not her first time either. She turned the folder around so I could see. Case file. Tampa, Florida, 2018. A woman named Victoria Cross. 57 pages of legal documents, depositions, settlement agreements. What am I looking at? I asked. Nearly identical scheme. Celeste said. Target was a 67-year-old restaurant owner, fake relationship, manufactured health crisis, asset transfer. She got him to sign over his business interests while he thought he was protecting her from family drama. What happened? He figured it out just before she disappeared. Filed criminal charges, but she had good lawyers. Settled the civil suit for $240,000 and disappeared. No jail time. I pulled the folder closer and started reading. The pattern was the same. Every detail, every step. Victoria Cross, or whoever she really was, had done this before. The photograph clipped to the Tampa case file showed Sloan at a charity gala in 2018. Younger, different hair color, same cold eyes. Same Birkin bag. Dad thinks he's running this, I heard myself say out loud, the realization forming as I spoke. He thinks Sloane's his partner. She's been running him the whole time. Celeste leaned back in her chair. Professional fraud specialist. This isn't love or revenge. It's her job. Luther's just her biggest mark yet. Hayes stood at the window looking out at Chicago. Which means she has her own exit plan. Separate from whatever she told Dad. Yes, Celeste said. I thought about the audio on the USB drive. Luther and Sloan planning Panama together. The passport expiring in June. The timeline they'd discussed like co-conspirators planning a future. They were never going to the same place. She's going to betray him, I said. She already is, Celeste replied. Luther just doesn't know it yet. Celeste's phone rang at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, and the name on the screen was one she'd been waiting to see for exactly 2 weeks. She called me the next morning. Preston Dalton phoned last night, she said when I walked into her office. 3rd time in 2 weeks. What did he want? To meet. Face to face. No recording off the record. Celeste set her coffee down on the desk. Those were his exact words, off the record, like this is a news interview and not his life. I sat down across from her. What did you tell him? Nothing. I let him talk, then said I'd consider it. Do you trust him? I asked. Celeste looked at me over her coffee cup. I believe he's scared. That's more reliable than trust. Scared of what? Luther. The case we're building. Prison. She pulled out a notepad where she'd written notes from the call. Preston notarized your signature on documents he knew were fraudulent. Federal crime. He facilitated interstate wire fraud. Another federal crime. He's starting to realize Luther positioned him perfectly. The notary who verified signatures bears all the legal liability if anything goes wrong. And now things are going wrong. From Preston's perspective, yes. Luther's still in Chicago. That means the plan isn't moving forward as scheduled. Preston's getting nervous. I thought about Preston standing at my door in November, handing me the pen, watching me sign 14 pages without reading. His practiced calm, his rehearsed answers to my questions. He deserves to be scared, I said. He does, Celeste agreed. But scared people make calculations. They start asking themselves if this goes wrong, who takes the fall. Preston's been asking that question for 2 weeks. He doesn't like the answer. Here's what you need to understand about accomplices. They're partners only until the moment they realize someone has to take the fall. Then it's not about loyalty. It's about arithmetic. Preston was doing the math. Will you meet with him? I asked. Eventually, when I need him to make a specific choice. Right now, it's more useful to let him sit with his fear. And while he sits, Celeste smiled. We finish building the trap. 2 weeks later, early March, I sat in Celeste's office past midnight with Hayes beside me and contract drafts spread across the conference table. Midwest Federal Carriers, LLC. Celeste said, pointing to the letterhead. Registered in Illinois 3 days ago. Pearl Garrison owner. Hayes Garrison director of operations. Real company, real registration. Real federal freight license. She slid another document across the table. Interstate Freight Service Agreement. $35 million over 3 years. Between Midwest Federal Carriers and Empire Logistics Corporation, which is a shell company I control through a New York attorney. I picked up the contract and started reading. 42 pages. Dense legal language. Standard clauses about insurance, vehicle maintenance, route specifications, payment schedules. Luther will have his lawyers review this, Hayes said. It needs to look completely legitimate. It is completely legitimate, Celeste said. Except for one clause. She pulled out a yellow highlighter and opened the contract to page 9. Clause 7. Confirmation of transaction history. Standard in federal freight contracts. It's always there, buried in the middle, and nobody reads it closely because it sounds like routine disclosure language. I leaned forward and read where she'd highlighted. Signatory confirms knowledge and legal ownership of all related business entities, including but not limited to those engaged in parallel transportation logistics or freight services, and acknowledges full disclosure of such entities as required under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Hayes read it twice. Then, Dad signs this. He's admitting he owns Starlight LLC, in writing, notarized. Self-incrimination, Celeste said. But he won't see it. He'll see $35 million. He'll see his son offering partnership. He'll see the perfect cover to stay in Chicago a few more weeks while this opportunity materializes. I read Clause 7 again. The language was dense, technical, buried between insurance requirements and maintenance schedules. Easy to miss, easy to ignore. Easy to sign without reading if you were focused on the dollar amount at the top of the page. It feels exactly like signing without reading, I said. I touched the paper where the clause sat hidden between standard legal language. For the first time in 2 months, I smiled. Good, Celeste said. That's exactly right. A legal contract is a locked room with one door. Most people look for the door. Celeste built the room so the only door led exactly where she wanted you to go, and you'd walk through it thinking it was your idea. Hayes picked up a red pen and circled something on page 3. What about the payment schedule? Dad will want to see cash flow projections, quarterly breakdowns. Already prepared, Celeste said, pulling out another folder. Projections show steady income over 3 years. First payment $200,000 transfers within 30 days of signing. Real money from my shell company to Midwest Federal. Luther sees proof the contract is legitimate. And then the IRS and FBI finish building their case. Agent Finch says they'll be ready by late April. We need Luther's signature before then so the case is complete. I looked at the calendar on Celeste's wall. March 7th. Late April was 6 weeks away. Luther's passport expired June 15th. We had time. Not much, but enough. When does Hayes make the call? I asked. Next week, Celeste said. Second contact. This time, he doesn't ask to follow Luther. He offers Luther something Luther wants more, a partnership with his son and 35 million reasons to stay in Chicago. I held the contract draft in both hands, Clause 7 glowing under Celeste's yellow highlighter. Luther had taught me how traps work by using one-on-me sign without reading trust. The person holding the pen let greed override caution. Now we'd built him the exact same trap, only bigger, wrapped in $35 million he couldn't resist. Celeste was right. The best weapon against a predator is his own appetite. All we needed now was to make Luther hungry enough to sign, and that meant Hayes had to make one more call. Hayes held the phone in one hand and Celeste's script in the other, and for 3 seconds before dialing, I watched my son prepare to offer his father 35 million reasons to walk into a trap. It was the second week of March. We were back in Celeste's office, the contract spread across her desk, the script typed on a single page in Hayes's hand. This time the phone went on speaker so Celeste and I could both hear. Hayes dialed. 3 rings. Then Luther's voice. Hayes. Dad. Hayes took a breath. I need to talk to you about something. Business. What kind of business? There's a contract. 35 million over 3 years, Interstate Freight New York Corporation. I need someone with experience. You're the only one I trust. Silence on the other end. I could hear Luther thinking. Tell me more, Luther said. Hayes launched into the details, reading from Celeste's script without making it sound like reading. Revenue projections, route specifications, insurance requirements. The kind of language Luther had used his entire career now being used to bait him. Luther asked 5 questions. What's the incorporation date of the New York entity? Hayes answered 18 months ago. Established freight history. What routes? Hayes answered Midwest to Eastern Seaboard, existing DOT permits. Insurance requirements. Hayes answered standard federal freight coverage already secured. Payment structure. Hayes answered quarterly disbursements, first payment within 30 days of signing. New York entity registration. Hayes answered Empire Logistics Corporation, registered agent in Manhattan. Hayes answered all 5 without hesitation. I watched Celeste nod at each response. Perfect execution. Then Luther asked a 6th question, one that wasn't on the script. Does your mother know about this? The question hung in the air like smoke. I sat perfectly still in my chair, watching Hayes's face. 3 seconds. I counted them. Celeste had trained him for this: unexpected questions, require pause, 2 fast answers, sound rehearsed. No, Hayes said. She doesn't know anything. Good. Luther's voice carried satisfaction. Let me talk to my partner. I'll call you back. The line went dead. Hayes set the phone down on Celeste's desk. His hands were steady, but I saw something in his eyes, the cost of calling Sloane my partner in front of me, describing the woman who'd helped erase his mother as if she deserved the title. I sat listening to my son lie to his father about a $35 million contract that didn't exist, and the strangest part was how easy it sounded, not because Hayes was naturally deceptive, but because the truth of what we were doing was so much larger than any single lie could contain. He took the bait, Celeste said. He asked about me. I said, why did he ask about me? Caution, Celeste replied. He's paranoid, testing whether Hayes is telling the truth or setting a trap. If you knew about the contract, Luther would suspect something. But if you're in the dark, ignorant, struggling, then Hayes's story makes sense. So my ignorance is proof of Hayes's honesty. Yes, I thought about that. How my erasure from Luther's life had been so complete that my continued absence was now the most convincing evidence that Hayes wasn't lying. 3 days later, Thursday evening, 9:17, Hayes's phone buzzed during dinner. We were at a diner near his apartment. Coffee and sandwiches. The kind of meal that didn't require much talking. His phone lit up on the table between us. Text message, Luther's number. Dad agrees. Then a second message, arrange meeting, need private meeting room, no more people needed. Hayes forwarded both messages to me and Celeste without speaking. I read them twice, 3 words via text. Dad agrees. 31 years of marriage reduced to 2 words and a period sent to our son's phone at 9:17 on a Thursday night. It's working, Hayes said quietly. Yes, I said. It is. The next morning, I met Celeste in her office. We need to set the date, she said, pulling out her calendar. The meeting, the signing, what date works for you? I didn't hesitate. May 10th. Celeste wrote it on her calendar, then looked up. Any particular reason? It's our wedding anniversary, I said. My voice was steady, calm. 31 years ago, May 10th, I married him. Seemed appropriate. Celeste's pen stopped mid-stroke. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she nodded, once wrote May 10th in capital letters and circled it. The Langham Hotel, she said. Private meeting room, VIP floor. I'll make the arrangements. How long until May 10th? I asked. Celeste counted on her calendar. 53 days. 53 days until Luther walked into the Langham Hotel thinking he was signing a $35 million contract and walked out in handcuffs realizing he'd signed his own confession. I looked at that red circle on Celeste's calendar, the same red marker she'd used to draw the trap on her whiteboard weeks earlier. May 10th, the day I pledged my life to Luther believing in forever. The day we stood in front of our families and promised 31 years ago. Now it would be the day I took everything back. I'll be spending my 32nd wedding anniversary, I said slowly, watching my husband get arrested. Celeste didn't smile, but something shifted in her eyes. Understanding. Maybe even approval. Yes, she said. You will. She circled the date again, pressing the marker hard enough to bleed through to the next page. 53 days. But first, Preston Dalton needed to decide whose side he was really on, and Celeste was about to give him a reason to choose. Celeste set a second USB drive on her desk, smaller than the first black, instead of silver, and said, Preston kept everything. It was early April. I'd arrived at Celeste's office expecting a routine update on the May 10th arrangements. Instead, she'd met Preston Dalton face to face the night before at an undisclosed location. No recording. Off the record. Exactly what Preston had requested weeks ago. He brought this, Celeste said, tapping the USB. Original documents, audio recordings, complete insurance file. I sat down across from her desk. Insurance against what? Against Luther. Celeste plugged the USB into her laptop. Preston recorded him. Every instruction Luther gave about forging signatures, falsifying dates, notarizing documents without proper identification. All on here. Why did he keep it? I asked. Celeste looked at me like I'd asked why water flows downhill. Because Luther told him exactly what would happen if they got caught. Preston would take the fall alone. You're the notary, you verify signatures, you bear responsibility. Those were Luther's exact words according to Preston. So Preston built his own exit. She opened a file on the laptop. Luther's voice filled the office. The dates need to match November 4th. She can't know the divorce petition is in there. You certify everything as witnessed on the 4th, got it? Preston's voice responding. And if someone audits the notarization, Luther, they won't. And if they do, you're a licensed notary who made a mistake. I'm just the husband. Celeste stopped the playback. There are 47 minutes of recordings like that. Dates match the signing. Luther's voice is clear. He's giving explicit instructions on how to commit federal fraud. He gave this to you in exchange for what I asked. Federal cooperation agreement. Immunity from prosecution. He testifies, walks free. Celeste closed the laptop. We don't just have evidence now. We have a witness who built the trap. Preston's second USB was like finding out your enemy's weapon was loaded with blanks the whole time, except these bullets were real, and they were pointed back at the person who'd handed Preston the gun. I held the small black USB in my hand. It weighed almost nothing. Less than Luther's coat lining USB. But this one had Luther's voice, his instructions, his confession in words he couldn't deny because they came from his own mouth. "Does Agent Finch have this?" I asked. "He'll have it tomorrow. Preston meets with IRS and FBI next week. Official deposition." Celeste took the USB back and locked it in her desk drawer. "Everything's in place. May 10th, 26 days. 26 days until Luther walked into the Langham Hotel thinking he was signing a contract with his son, walked out in handcuffs realizing he'd confessed to $18 million of fraud in writing and on recording. "One more call," Celeste said. "Hayes confirms the final logistics. Then we go silent until the 10th, mid-April." Hayes sat in the same chair where he'd made the previous calls, phone in hand script on Celeste's desk. This would be the third call, the last one before May 10th. I sat on the couch against the wall watching. Celeste stood by her window, arms crossed. Hayes dialed. 3 rings. Luther answered. "Hayes." "Dad, confirming everything for the 10th. Go ahead." "May 10th, 11:30. The Langham Hotel. Private meeting room, 18th floor, Riverview. I confirmed this morning." "Security." "Standard hotel security. VIP floor requires keycard access. I have 3 cards. 1 for me, 1 for you, 1 for the New York representative. Payment method. Cashier's check from Empire Logistics Corporation. 200,000 first quarterly disbursement. I'll have it at the meeting. Room capacity. Seats 12. Private. No recording equipment per your request. Parking. Valet or self-park. Your choice." Luther was silent for a moment. Then, "Does your mother know about this?" I watched Hayes's face. He'd been asked this question before. But hearing it again, Luther checking, double-checking, needing repeated reassurance that I was still ignorant, hit differently. 3 seconds. Hayes's training held. "She doesn't know anything," he said. His voice was steady, empty. Luther hung up without saying goodbye. Hayes set the phone down on Celeste's desk carefully, like it might break if he wasn't gentle. His hands were shaking. "Are you okay?" Celeste asked. Hayes nodded. He didn't speak, didn't look at either of us. There's a particular way a person holds their body when they're lying to someone they love. Shoulders slightly forward, hands too, still eyes focused on anything except the person asking if they're okay. Hayes held himself exactly that way after hanging up with his father. "That's it," Celeste said. "No more calls until May 10th. Radio silence." Hayes stood. "I need air. I'll call you tomorrow." "Hayes," I started. "I'm fine, Mom." He looked at me then. "I'm fine." He wasn't, but he left anyway. I watched him walk out of Celeste's office, watched the door close behind him, and understood something I'd been avoiding. My son was paying for my justice with pieces of his relationship to his father that he'd never get back. Every lie he told Luther was true. Every time he said "Dad" with affection in his voice while planning his father's arrest, something in Hayes broke a little more, and he was doing it anyway. "He'll be okay," Celeste said quietly. "Will he?" She didn't answer. I sat in that office for another hour, not talking, just thinking about cost, about what justice requires, about whether revenge and righteousness are different things or just the same thing viewed from different angles. But before I could question whether the cost was too high, I'd learned that IRS had found something in Sloane's finances that changed everything. Agent Roger Finch didn't usually smile during investigation updates, which made it more unsettling when he did looking at Sloane Whitfield's financial records on Celeste's conference table. It was late April. 3 days after Hayes's final confirmation call. Finch had requested an urgent meeting about developments in the Starlight investigation. I'd expected bad news. Instead, I got his smile. During our Starlight investigation, Finch said, spreading printouts across Celeste's conference table, "We ran parallel checks on associated parties. Standard procedure. Follow the money. See who else shows up." He slid a document toward me. Bank statements, account activity reports, wire transfer summaries. So, Sloane Whitfield declared $42,000 in annual income last year. Medical clinic assistant, Part-time. Her international transaction history suggests significantly higher liquidity. What does that mean? I asked. It means, Finch said, tapping the printout with one finger, Ms. Whitfield has financial patterns inconsistent with her declared income. Multiple international wire transactions, offshore account activity. The kind of structure people use when they're planning to disappear with money they don't want traced. Are you saying she has money Luther doesn't know about? Finch's smile was the kind prosecutors get when they hold better cards than anyone expects. I'm saying Ms. Whitfield has been busy. Celeste leaned forward. How much? Can't disclose specifics mid-investigation, Finch said. But enough that Mr. Garrison would be very interested if he knew, which, based on our analysis, he doesn't. I thought about the Tampa case file, Victoria Cross, the restaurant owner she'd defrauded in 2018, the pattern repeating. Luther thought Sloan was his partner. But Sloan was running her own operation, building her own exit using Luther the same way she'd used the man in Tampa. Does this change May 10th? Celeste asked. Finch closed the file and looked at both of us. No, but it will make that meeting more interesting than any of you are planning for. Trust me on that. He stood, collected his papers, and walked to the door. Everything's proceeding as planned. IRS and FBI are ready. Your trap is solid. I just wanted you to know when that door closes on May 10th. There's going to be more than one person realizing they've been played. After Finch left, I sat in Celeste's conference room looking at the spot where Sloane's financial records had been. She's going to run, I said. When Luther gets arrested, Sloane disappears with her offshore money. Probably, Celeste said. But that's not our problem. Our problem is Luther. The IRS will handle Sloane. 9 days. I looked at the calendar after Agent Finch left. 9 days until I walked into the Langham and watched my marriage end in a hotel conference room with Lake Michigan out the window. May 1st, 9:17 at night. Someone knocked on my rental apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Celeste had said radio silence until the 10th. No contact unless emergency. I opened the door. Hayes stood there, hands in his pockets. No bag, no explanation. Can I come in? He asked. I stepped aside. He walked to my small sofa and sat down. Didn't take off his jacket. Didn't explain why he was there. Just sat. I gave him 10 minutes of silence. Then I sat beside him. What's wrong? I asked. I'm not sure I can do this. His voice was quiet, steady. Going into that room, looking at Dad, knowing what happens next. I didn't rush to reassure him. Didn't tell him it would be fine or that we'd already come too far to stop. I just let the doubt breathe. What if he looks at me? Hayes continued. And he knows what if he sees it in my face. He won't. But what if he does? I thought about the storage shed. The night I'd never told Hayes about fully. The real version, not the sanitized summary. I haven't told you about that night, I said. The one where I found the USB. Not really. Hayes looked at me. I sat on cardboard boxes at 2 a.m, wondering if I'd freeze before morning, holding a USB drive I hadn't opened yet. Nowhere to go. No money. Evicted from my own house. Wearing your father's coat because it was the warmest thing I could find. I paused, remembering the cold. I didn't know if I could do it either. Open that USB. Face what was on it. Build a case. Go through with revenge. But I also didn't have a choice. Not because someone was forcing me. Because staying where I was, believing I'd been erased, accepting that 31 years ended with me in a storage shed, was worse than whatever came next. Hayes listened without speaking. You can stop, I said. Right now, walk away, I'll understand. No, you won't. I will, because I know what this costs. There are conversations that happen in silence, the kind where you sit beside someone and the air between you carries everything that doesn't need words. Hayes and I had that conversation on my rental apartment sofa while Chicago slept outside. He stayed, slept on the sofa that night, didn't ask for blankets, didn't say when he was leaving. When I woke at 6 the next morning, Hayes was already up. I smelled coffee before I opened my eyes. He'd made it. 2 cups on my small kitchen table, his still steaming. I came out of the bedroom. Hayes stood by the counter, jacket already on. He looked at me, nodded once. Didn't say he'd changed his mind, didn't say he was ready, didn't need to. He left for work. I sat at my small rental apartment table drinking the coffee Hayes made still warm in the cup he'd poured before leaving. He hadn't said he'd changed his mind about walking into the Langham with his father. He hadn't needed to. The coffee said it. I'm here. I'm staying. Whatever this costs, I'm paying it. 9 days left. But before those 9 days ran out, I'd spend one night alone doing something I'd been avoiding since January, and it would hurt more than I expected. At 2 in the morning, on the night before your wedding anniversary becomes your judgment day, you don't sleep. You take inventory of 31 years and decide what deserves to be mourned. I sat at my rental apartment window overlooking Chicago. May 9th. Tomorrow was May 10th. 32 years since I'd married Luther Garrison, believing in forever. Tomorrow, that forever ended. I couldn't sleep. Didn't try. Instead, I did what accountants do. I tallied the years. Morning routine, making Luther's coffee with exactly 2 sugars stirred clockwise 3 times, because that's how his mother made it. 31 years of 3 sugar clockwise stirs. October 1993. Luther and I clinked beer cans in our garage celebrating 14 trucks. He'd lifted his can and said, "We did this. Not me, we." I remembered believing that word meant something permanent. 1998. Our first federal freight contract. $800,000 over 2 years. Luther had lifted me off the ground right there in the office, spinning me in a circle while our 3 employees cheered. His face, I could still see it. Pure joy. Or was it, had I seen joy because that's what I wanted to see? When did you change, Luther? Or were you always this person and I chose not to see it? At 3 in the morning, I realized it doesn't matter. That question is its own trap, the kind that keeps you looking backward when the only direction that matters is forward. Whether Luther changed, or whether he was always capable of this, the result is the same. I was here. He was there. And tomorrow we'd both be at the Langham. I stood and walked to my closet. In the back behind the clothes I'd worn through the last 4 months of building this trap, hung the navy blazer from my first day at the company office in 1992. I pulled it out. 31 years later, it still fit. Tomorrow I'd wear it again. Full circle. The night before you take back everything stolen from you, you become an accountant again, not of money, but of memory. You total 31 years, separate what was real from what was performance, and carry forward only what has value after the loss. At dawn, I made coffee, drank it alone, got dressed. Navy suit, 1992. The woman who'd worn this first was younger, more naive, still believed in we. The woman wearing it now was older, wiser, believed only in I. Same suit, different woman. I arrived at the Langham Hotel at 7 in the morning, May 10th, my 32nd wedding anniversary, Judgment Day. The lobby was exactly as Celeste had described: marble floors, brass fixtures, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River. Elegant, expensive. The kind of place where $35 million contracts get signed. Celeste was already there, standing near the elevators with her tablet. "Status?" I asked. She ticked items without looking up. "FBI warrants executed and ready. IRS freeze orders signed. Preston's cooperation agreement filed yesterday. Dr. Mercer's deal activates post-arrest. Wade Bentley in Las Vegas PD custody as of midnight." Wade? Fake death certificate. FBI coordinated with Las Vegas PD. Picked him up at his apartment last night. Clean arrest, no complications. Every piece was falling into place. Preston, Mercer, Wade. All 3 conspirators who'd helped Luther fake his death were either cooperating or in custody. "Where are the agents?" I asked. "Adjacent hallway, 18th floor. 4 agents in plain clothes. Federal arrest warrants for Luther Garrison and Sloan Whitfield. Wire fraud, conspiracy, asset theft. IRS has freeze orders ready for all accounts associated with Starlight LLC. 4 FBI agents in plain clothes positioned in adjacent hallways invisible to hotel guests, waiting with federal arrest warrants and the patience of people who'd done this 100 times. When Hayes arrives, I started. I'm here. I turned. Hayes stood 10 feet away wearing a charcoal gray suit I'd never seen before. Perfectly tailored, the kind you wear when you need armor. You look like your father, I said before I could stop myself. Hayes met my eyes. Today that's useful. We rode the elevator to the 18th floor in silence. Celeste led us to the VIP conference room windows overlooking the river mahogany table that seated 12 leather chairs, coffee service already arranged. Luther confirmed arrival at 11:30. Celeste said, checking her watch. Sloan will be with him. The VIP room is ready. FBI is positioned. Everything that can be prepared is prepared. I walked to the window, looked out at Chicago, the city where I'd built a business, the city where I'd lost everything, the city where I was about to take it back. At 11 o'clock, we went back down to the lobby. 30 minutes. I looked at the Langham's lobby clock, 11 o'clock exactly. In half an hour, Luther would walk through those brass revolving doors thinking he was about to become $35 million richer. Hayes stood beside me, silent, waiting. Celeste stood 10 feet away, phone in hand, coordinating FBI positions via encrypted text. I stood in the Langham lobby at 11 o'clock on May 10th, my 32nd wedding anniversary, wearing the navy suit from my first day at the company, watching the brass revolving doors. Everything was ready. I was ready. 11:15, 11:20, 11:28. Celeste's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, looked at me, nodded once. And then, at 11:32, 2 minutes late, the brass doors revolved and there he was. The security monitor in the adjacent room showed 2 people stepping off the 18th floor elevator at 11:32, 2 minutes late, which meant Luther was nervous. I stood in a small monitoring room next to the VIP conference room, watching through a camera feed as my husband of 32 years walked down the hallway with the woman who'd helped erase me. Luther wore a gray Milan suit I'd paid for on our joint credit card 2 years ago. Sloan Whitfield, 38, and carrying the same Birkin bag from the Costa Rica photos, walked beside him with the practiced stillness of someone who'd done this before, because in Tampa, under a different name, she had. 2 minutes late. Luther was never late to meetings about money, which meant he was nervous or Sloan made him wait while she checked her appearance one more time. Through the camera, I watched Hayes open the VIP room door. My son stood in the doorway wearing his charcoal suit, and I saw the moment Luther's face brightened relief, maybe, or love, or both. Hayes extended his hand. Luther took it. They shook hands. Father and son. A normal greeting. The kind I'd watched 1,000 times. Except this time I was watching my son shake hands with the man who tried to erase me. And even on that small screen, I could see what it cost Hayes. The slight stiffness in his shoulders, the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Luther stepped into the conference room, Sloan following. Hayes gestured to the table, mahogany 12 chairs, contract documents laid out precisely where Celeste had positioned them. Where's the New York representative? Luther's voice came through the camera audio, tinny but clear. Hayes's reply was script perfect. They'll be here soon. Would you like water while we wait? No. Luther walked the perimeter of the room, checking windows, checking corners, looking for what I wasn't sure. Escape routes, recording devices. He was paranoid. Good. Sloan sat in the chair Luther had indicated second from the head of the table. She placed her Birkin bag on the floor beside her chair, the handle still visible. Her hands were steady, calm, professional. Luther sat at the head of the table. The position he always took in meetings, the power seat. Not for long. I checked my watch. 11:37. 9 minutes until I walked through that door. I've watched many things through screens in my life. GPS trackers showing 63 trucks crossing state lines, security footage of warehouse loading docks, weather radar before long hauls. Nothing prepared me for watching my son shake hands with the man who tried to erase me. Celeste appeared beside me in the monitoring room. Ready? Yes. Remember, you speak first, set the tone, control the room. I nodded. 4 minutes, she said. I watched Luther on the screen. He was tapping his fingers on the table, a nervous habit I'd seen maybe 5 times in 31 years. Only when something was making him anxious. Good. Before I walk through that door and face him for the first time in 7 months, I need to ask, are you still with me? Comment A if you think confronting him face to face is right, or B if you think sending the evidence to authorities quietly would have been better, and tell me why in one sentence. Please note what follows includes recreated details for emotional impact. If you're not comfortable with dramatized confrontation, feel free to pause here. 11:41. I put my hand on the VIP room door handle, took one breath, then opened it. Luther jumped from his chair like he'd been shocked. His face went pale, 2 full seconds of pure white before he attempted to compose himself. What is this? His voice had the particular pitch of someone whose script just caught fire. What are you doing here? I didn't answer immediately. I let him see me, let him process. Sloane hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still in her chair, but I could see her knuckles white around the Birkin bag handle. Hayes stepped away from the table and came to stand beside me. No words. He didn't need them. My son chose his side without speaking, standing where I could see him, where Luther could see him too. Celeste entered behind me, walking to the wall where the projector was mounted. She pressed a button. The white wall lit up with diagrams. Starlight Logistics LLC. Shell company structure. 14 transactions. Luther's name, Sloane's name, dates, dollar amounts. The entire financial web glowing 6 feet high on the conference room wall. Luther stared at the projection, then at me, then at Hayes, then back at me. Hayes. Luther's voice cracked on his son's name. What is this? Hayes said nothing. I walked to the head of the table, the chair Luther had been sitting in. He'd moved when he jumped up, standing now halfway between his seat and the door, frozen in the space between fight and flight. I sat down in his chair. Hello, Luther. My voice was steady as winter. 7 months since I'd spoken to my husband. Those were the words I chose to restart the conversation. How are you? Luther's face when I walked in. Recognition, then horror, then calculation. 3 expressions in 2 seconds, like watching someone's brain try to rewrite reality faster than reality was arriving. I sat in Luther's chair at the head of the table, Starlight LLC's financial web glowing on the wall behind me, my son standing at my right shoulder, Celeste at my left. Luther stood frozen halfway between sitting and standing, his mouth open, on a question he couldn't finish. 7 months ago, he'd watched me sign away my life. Now I was going to watch him do the same. And the first thing he needed to understand was exactly what he'd signed. 42 days before I sat in that chair and said hello to my husband for the last time, I stood in the empty VIP room at the Langham and rehearsed every move. Late March 2023, spring afternoon, Celeste and I met Vincent Sterling, the Langham's events manager, in the lobby at 2 o'clock. Vincent Sterling conducted the VIP suite tour with the practiced discretion of someone who'd hosted everything from wedding proposals to corporate takeovers and knew not to ask which this was. The VIP conference room offers complete privacy, Sterling said as we stepped off the elevator onto the 18th floor. 1,800 square feet accommodates 12 comfortably floor-to-ceiling river views. We can arrange catering, audio-visual equipment, adjacent breakout space, whatever you need. He opened the door. The room was exactly what I'd imagined from the photos Celeste had shown me. Long mahogany table, 12 leather chairs, windows spanning the entire North Wall Chicago River, visible below, the kind of view that declared money and power before anyone spoke. I walked the perimeter slowly. This was the space. This was where it would happen. The adjacent room, I said, turning to Sterling. Can we access it simultaneously with direct sightline to this space? Yes, it's part of the VIP suite package. He walked to a door I hadn't noticed blended into the wood paneling. Security cameras feed to both rooms in real time. Many clients use it for overflow seating or private negotiations. We'll need that, Celeste said. I stood at the head of the table. The power position. Luther would sit here first. Then I'd take it from him. I mapped the room in my mind. Hayes would stand here by the door. Luther would enter there. Sloane beside him. They'd sit Luther at the head, Sloane to his right. I'd watch from the adjacent room through the security feed. When the time came, I'd walk through that door and Hayes would step to my side. Here's what planning revenge teaches you. It's not about anger, though. Anger starts it. It's about architecture, knowing where every person will stand, what they'll see, what they won't see, until the moment you want them to see it. I was building a room where the only exit led through truth. Where does the projection screen deploy? Celeste asked. Sterling pressed a button on the wall panel. A white screen descended from the ceiling, covering the north windows. Motorized HD-compatible pairs with any standard equipment. Perfect. Celeste would stand there by the control panel. Luther and Sloane would see their names. Their transactions, their entire scheme projected 6 feet high before they understood what was happening. Security protocols, Celeste asked. If we need law enforcement on standby, we coordinate with Chicago PD regularly for high-profile events, Sterling said. If you provide advance notice, we can arrange discreet positioning, adjacent hallways, service corridors, whatever maintains the confidentiality you require. I walked to the windows and looked down at the Chicago River. 42 days. May 10th. My wedding anniversary. The day I'd stand in this room and watch my marriage end in real time. The booking, I asked. May 10th, 11:30 to 2, Celeste said. 3-hour block. Private, no staff interruptions unless requested. Sterling made notes on his tablet. I'll send the contract this afternoon. Full payment 2 weeks prior. Cancellation policy applies. We won't be canceling, I said. After Sterling left, Celeste and I stood in the empty conference room. She walked to the projection screen. I stood at the head of the table. We didn't speak for several minutes. 42 days, Celeste finally said. Everything that can go wrong, we prepare for. Everything we can control, we control. The rest we adapt to when it arrives. I finished. I sat in the chair at the head of the table, Luther's chair, for 42 more days. Tested how it felt. The leather was soft, expensive. The kind of chair meant for people who make important decisions. In 42 days, I'd make the most important decision of Luther's life for him. Celeste pulled out her phone and took photos, angles, sightlines, measurements. Hayes will need to see these. He needs to know exactly where to position himself, where you'll be, where his father will sit. I know. This is going to work, Celeste said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same certainty she'd used for everything else. But you need to understand, when Luther walks through that door on May 10th, when he sees you for the first time in 7 months, his first instinct will be to run or fight. You can't give him time for either. I won't. The Langhams' VIP room was a stage, and I was directing a play where the actors didn't know they'd been cast until opening night, except Hayes, who knew his role would cost him something he'd never recover, and chose it anyway. I stood and walked back to the windows. From here, I could see the entire city spread below. The city where I'd built a business. The city where Luther had tried to erase me. The city where in 42 days I'd erase him instead. What if he doesn't come? I asked quietly. He'll come, Celeste said. Greed overrides caution, always. That's the bet we're making. And if we're wrong, then we've rented a very expensive conference room for nothing. I smiled despite myself. 42 days. 42 days, Celeste repeated. And then we find out if 4 months of planning and a lifetime of trust was enough to build a trap strong enough to hold him. I left the Langham that March afternoon with the mental map of May 10th already complete, where I'd stand, where Luther would sit, which words I'd say first, how the light would fall through those windows onto the contract he hadn't read. I'd prepared for everything I could imagine. In those 42 days between March and May, not everything went according to plan. Some things went better, which I'd learn when Luther finally understood what he'd actually walked into that VIP room to sign. 42 days of preparation collapsed into a single heartbeat. I snapped back to the present, 11:43 a.m. May 10th, 2023. The VIP room at the Langham. Luther sitting across from me with that contract signed in front of him, his pen still resting on the mahogany table. Sloane beside him in her cream silk blouse, one manicured hand on his shoulder. Hayes standing near the window with his arms crossed, his face carefully neutral. And Celeste, my attorney, my secret weapon, rising from her chair with Luther's signed contract in her hands. "Mr. Garrison," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "Thank you for your signature. Before we proceed with the wire transfer, I need to clarify a few details about what you've just signed." Luther waved a dismissive hand. "It's straightforward. $35 million for a logistics contract. Preston reviewed the terms last week." "He did." Celeste agreed. She opened the folder and extracted the first page, laying it flat on the table. Section 2, Paragraph 4. The undersigned party acknowledges full ownership and operational control of Starlight LLC, a Delaware-registered entity from September 2021 to present date. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Luther's smile flickered. That's just confirming my credentials as a business owner. Standard language." Section 5, Paragraph 8. Celeste continued flipping to another page. "The undersigned party hereby acknowledges the unlawful transfer of marital assets totaling $18,247,650 from joint accounts registered under Luther James Garrison and Pearl Constance Garrison, executed without consent or knowledge of co-owner Pearl Constance Garrison." Sloane's hand tightened on Luther's shoulder. "Furthermore," Celeste said, Section 7, Paragraph 2 stipulates that in acknowledgement of this transfer, the undersigned party agrees to full restitution in the amount of $22,200,000, the original sum plus interest and penalties to be paid within 120 days of contract execution. Luther lunged to his feet. "What the hell is this?" "A confession," I said quietly. Every head turned toward me. I stood slowly, my hands steady on the table. "Midwest Federal Carriers doesn't exist, Luther. Or rather it does, but I own it. The company was incorporated on March 29, 2023 with me as the sole proprietor. This contract isn't a business deal. It's a legal admission that you own Starlight LLC, that you stole nearly $20 million from our marriage, and that you owe me restitution." The color drained from his face. "You signed it." I continued, my voice gaining strength. "You put your name on 14 pages without reading a single word. That feeling, signing without reading, trusting someone who tells you it's fine, it's routine. Just sign here and here and here." I paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "Does that sound familiar, Luther?" His mouth opened, closed. His eyes darted to the contract, then to Celeste, then to me. "You can't. This isn't legally binding. I was deceived. Any court will throw this out." "Any court will examine the facts," Celeste said. "You met with our representatives twice before today. You had your attorney review the terms. You signed voluntarily in a clear state of mind with witnesses present. The only difference between this contract and the one you had your wife sign in October is that you claimed you had terminal cancer and only months to live according to your fabricated diagnosis." Luther spun toward Hayes. "Call Preston, now. Get him on the phone." "Dad." Hayes's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He stepped away from the window, moving to stand beside my chair. Not beside Luther. Beside me. "Hayes," Luther's voice cracked. "Son, you need to—" "I'm not your son anymore." The words landed like a physical blow. Hayes's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. "I've spent the last 6 weeks playing a role, calling you, meeting with you, convincing you that I was on your side, that I believed Mom was the problem, that I wanted to help you secure your future. Every word was a lie. Luther staggered backward. You don't mean that. You're confused. She's manipulating you. You used Mom's love to deceive her. Hayes said, his voice dropping to something cold and final. So I used your love for me to get everything back for Mom. Silence. Luther looked at his son, our son, as if seeing a stranger. His hands trembled. His breath came in short, shallow gasps. You're a smart man, Mr. Garrison, Celeste said, her tone almost gentle. You built an entire second life on deception. Faked medical records, staged a death, created shell companies. But you made one critical error. She tapped the contract. You assumed everyone else operates the way you do. That they sign without reading. That they trust without verifying. That they believe without questioning. She slid the contract across the table toward him. You have 120 days to arrange restitution. My office will be in touch regarding the payment schedule. Luther's face had gone from pale to mottled red, his hands clenched into fists. I won't pay a goddamn cent. You can't make me. Sloane's phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. She pulled it from her purse, glanced at the screen, and the blood drained from her face. Her eyes snapped to Luther, then to me. For the first time since I'd entered the room, I saw something crack in her perfect composure. Luther, she whispered, we need to leave. Now. I smiled, because I knew exactly what message she'd just received. The second trap had sprung. Hayes moved to the side table and opened his laptop. His fingers danced across the keyboard. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of breaking glass static and shouting voices crackling through the speakers. What is that? Luther demanded. Hayes turned the laptop toward the table. Live feed, River North, your apartment. The screen showed a security camera view of Luther's living room, the one he shared with Sloane in the building where he'd supposedly built his new life. Men in navy windbreakers with yellow lettering streamed through the door. FBI, IRS. They moved with precision, sealing doorways, photographing documents, speaking into radios. Luther's face went white. The feed is live, Hayes said quietly. Chicago is watching. As if on cue, a second window opened on the screen. The Chicago Tribune website. The breaking news ticker scrolled across the top in bold red letters. Federal agents raid. River North. Apartment Starlight. LLC fraud investigation owner, Luther Garrison, sought for questioning. Sloane made a small sound in her throat. A third window opened. A news camera feed from the lobby downstairs. I could see the Langham's marble floors, the registration desk, and a reporter in a red blazer speaking into a microphone. The closed captioning scrolled below her. Sources confirm the target of the investigation is currently in the building. Federal agents are expected to make contact within the hour. Turn it off, Luther whispered. Turn it off. No, I said. Every eye in the room turned toward me. I stood and walked slowly to the laptop, my reflection ghosting across the screen over the images of Luther's apartment being dismantled piece by piece. Let them see what you built, Luther. Every shell company, every forged signature. Every dollar you moved while I sat in that hospice room believing I had 48 hours left to live. The live feed continued. An agent lifted a laptop from Luther's desk. Another held up a file folder. The camera captured it all in clinical detail. Luther's hands trembled. He looked at Hayes at the laptop, at the images of his life being broadcast across the city. You coordinated this. The media. The timing. Celeste coordinated it, I said. I just said yes. Sloane's phone buzzed again. She glanced down, her face pale, then looked at Luther. We need to leave. Now. Before what? Celeste's voice cut through the chaos. She stood and opened another folder, this one slim and cream-colored. Before the second investigation becomes public, she laid a document on the table. I moved closer, reading over Luther's shoulder. Bank statements, account numbers, a logo I recognized, Cayman International Trust. 31 years, and I never imagined it would end with cameras. This account was opened in September 2021, Celeste said, 6 months before Luther staged his death. The initial deposit was $400,000. Over the following 18 months, it received regular transfers totaling $5.4 million. Luther stared at the page. I don't understand. Starlight's offshore accounts were in the Bahamas. This isn't Starlight, Celeste agreed. She tapped the name at the top of the statement. Account holder Sloan Whitfield, sole signatory. The room went silent. Luther turned slowly toward Sloan. His mouth opened, closed. His eyes searched her face as if seeing her for the first time. The deposits align with Starlight withdrawals. Celeste continued, her voice calm and professional. Every time Luther moved money from the marital accounts into Starlight, a parallel transfer went to this Cayman account. Same dates, proportional amounts. Mrs. Whitfield wasn't just helping Luther steal from Pearl. She was stealing from Luther at the same time. Sloane's hands trembled, but her face remained carefully neutral. You tricked me, Luther said. His voice cracked. You tricked me too. She met his gaze. For a long moment she said nothing. Then softly, I learned from the best. Sole signatory, 2 words that changed everything. I should have felt triumphant. I should have felt vindicated. But standing there watching Luther stare at the woman he'd left me for the woman who'd betrayed him exactly the way he'd betrayed me, I felt something else entirely. Sadness. Not for him. Not even for what we'd lost. But for the sheer waste of it all. 31 years of marriage reduced to this 3 people in a hotel room, each one having lied to the others, each one having stolen what they thought they could get away with. The IRS has frozen the Cayman account as of this morning, Celeste said. Mrs. Whitfield is named as a co-conspirator in the federal investigation. The $5.4 million will be seized and applied toward restitution. Sloane's careful composure finally cracked. Her hands shook. Her breath came faster. You can't, I didn't. You did, I said quietly. You helped him fake a cancer diagnosis. You helped him forge my signature. You helped him steal nearly $20 million. And while you were doing all of that, you were stealing from him too. Her eyes snapped to mine. For a moment, I saw something raw beneath the surface. Fear. Desperation. The same look I must have worn in October when I sat in that office and signed away everything I owned. The difference, I continued, is that I have proof. Celeste has proof. The IRS has proof. And Chicago. I gestured toward the laptop where the news feed continued to scroll. Chicago is watching. Luther sank into his chair. His face had gone from red to gray. His hands lay flat on the table, palms down, as if he needed the solid surface to keep himself upright. The laptop speakers crackled. The FBI agent on the screen spoke into his radio. The Chicago Tribune ticker updated second suspect identified Sloan Whitfield Cayman Islands accounts. Before Luther could speak, before Sloan could move, the VIP room door opened. 2 federal agents stepped inside. Navy suits, badges raised. 1 male, 1 female, both with expressions I recognized from 1,000 crime procedurals professional, detached, utterly certain of their authority. My heart hammered against my ribs. Theory was about to become handcuffs. The lead agent's voice cut through the silence like a knife. Luther James Garrison, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, tax evasion, and fraudulent asset transfer. The words landed with the weight of finality. Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact backed by the full authority of the United States government. Luther stood frozen, his face cycling through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like confusion. You can't, I haven't. The agent stepped forward, badge still raised. Behind him, 3 more agents filed into the VIP room flanking the exits. Professional, efficient, utterly certain. You have the right to remain silent. The agent continued, already reaching for the handcuffs on his belt. Anything you say, can and will be used against you in a court of law. A second agent moved toward Sloan. Sloan Marie Whitfield, you are under arrest for wire fraud and conspiracy to commit financial fraud. Sloan's carefully composed mask shattered. Her hands flew up as if to ward off the words. No. No, I didn't. I was just... You have the right to remain silent. Metal clicked around Luther's wrists. Then Sloan's. The sound echoed in the quiet room, sharp, final, irrevocable. Both of them. Handcuffed, arrested. Exactly as Celeste had planned. Luther turned to Sloan, desperation bleeding into his voice. Tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them... But Sloan turned away, her face pale, her bound hands trembling. He looked at Hayes then. At his son. Our son. Hayes, please. You have to... I don't have to do anything, Hayes said quietly. The lead agent gestured toward the door. Let's go. They moved Luther first. Then Sloan. The other agents formed a corridor, guiding them out of the VIP room and toward the elevator. Hayes, Celeste, and I stood near the window, no longer part of the scene. The divide between guilty and innocent made physical. Celeste closed her folders with careful precision. The arraignment will be tomorrow morning, federal court. I'll have the restitution documents filed by end of business today. I nodded, but I couldn't quite form words yet. Everything felt distant, muffled, as if I were watching through glass. Mom. Hayes's voice soft beside me. You okay? I will be, I said. The elevator doors closed on Luther and Sloan and the 4 federal agents. The numbers above the door began counting down. 6, 5, 4. I'm taking the stairs, I said suddenly. Hayes frowned. It's 12 floors. I know. I picked up my purse, my hand steady on the leather strap. I need a moment. Alone. He studied my face, then nodded. I'll meet you in the lobby. The stairwell was cool and quiet. My footsteps echoed against concrete as I descended 1 floor at a time. My hands gripped the railing not for balance, but for the solidity of it. The proof that this was real. That I was still here. After months of trembling, they were finally still. I reached the ground floor and pushed through the stairwell door into the lobby. The Langham's marble floors gleamed under crystal chandeliers. Registration desk to the left. Sitting area to the right. And straight ahead near the front entrance, a cluster of reporters with cameras and microphones. Luther and Sloan stood in the center of the lobby, flanked by federal agents, hands cuffed in front of them. Flashes erupted. Questions shouted over one another, exactly as Celeste had orchestrated. I stayed near the elevator bank, half hidden behind a marble column. Hayes found me there, his hand settling on my shoulder. Chicago's going to remember this, he said quietly. I watched Luther's face, the man I'd spent 31 years married to, as he was paraded past the cameras. His expression had gone blank, shut down as if he'd retreated somewhere deep inside himself, where none of this could touch him. Sloan kept her head down, her hair falling forward to hide her face. The agents guided them toward the front doors, toward the waiting vehicles, toward whatever came next. And then I saw him. A man standing near the concierge desk, half turned toward the commotion, a phone in his weathered hands. He wore a work uniform, dark pants, button-down shirt with a company logo I recognized instantly. Garrison Freight and Logistics, the logo Luther had designed 20 years ago. Bryn Lockwood, the company's driver for 18 years, 52 years old, with graying temples and permanent smile lines from 1,000 conversations on loading docks and in truck cabs. He'd driven Luther to business meetings, airport runs, client dinners. He had been part of the machinery that kept the company running, invisible and essential. He looked up from his phone, the news article still glowing on the screen, and his eyes found mine across the lobby. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he walked toward me. Not toward Luther, not toward the cameras. Toward me. He stopped 3 feet away, his hands loose at his sides, his expression careful. Mrs. Garrison. Bryn, I said. My voice almost broke on his name. He nodded once. A simple dip of his chin. Nothing dramatic. Nothing performative. Just acknowledgement. Solidarity. A choice made visible. One nod. That's all it takes to rewrite the story of who stood by her. I nodded back. Two nods that said everything about loyalty. About who saw the truth and chose to stand on the right side of it. About blood not defining family and titles not defining worth. Thank you, I whispered. He nodded again, then stepped back, returning to his spot near the concierge desk. Not making a scene, not drawing attention. Just being there. Being seen. Hayes squeezed my shoulder. Come on, let's get out of here. We walked toward the side exit, away from the cameras and the chaos. The May sunlight hit me as we stepped outside, warm and bright, and somehow startling after the cool dimness of the hotel. I stood on the sidewalk, blinking against the light. The street noise, rushed-in traffic voices, the distant wail of a siren. The city moving forward, indifferent to the small drama that had just played out inside the Langham's walls. Hayes stood beside me, waiting. I pulled out my phone. The screen glowed in my hand, notifications stacked one on top of another. Messages, emails, news alerts. But none of that mattered right now, because there was one person who wasn't in that VIP room. One person who hadn't seen the look on Luther's face when the handcuffs clicked shut. One person I hadn't spoken to since this whole thing began. One person who deserved to hear the truth directly from me. I went back inside. Hayes and Celeste stayed until 1 o'clock, tying up the last administrative threads. Signatures, filings, the machinery of justice turning its wheels. Then they left, and I asked the hotel staff for a few more minutes alone in the VIP room. Now it was 2 o'clock, and the silence in the empty room was louder than any of Luther's excuses ever were. I sat in the chair I'd occupied that morning, Luther's chair across from me, still pushed back at an angle exactly where he'd left it when the agents came. The table between us held nothing now. No contracts, no folders. Just polished mahogany reflecting the afternoon light. The Chicago River stretched below the window, gray-blue under the May sky. Boats moved along its surface, oblivious to the small drama that had unfolded 12 floors above them. I turned and looked at my chair from this morning. My coat still draped across the back where I'd left it. I'd done that on purpose. The realization settled over me with quiet certainty. When I'd walked into this room at 11:30 a.m., I'd taken off my coat and set it carefully on that chair. Not because the room was warm, not because I was uncomfortable, but because some part of me, the part that had been planning and preparing for 42 days, knew I wouldn't need armor anymore. I'd walked in here as the victor. I just hadn't admitted it to myself yet. 31 years, I said aloud to the empty room. And I never once sat in the owner's chair. My voice sounded strange without anyone to hear it. But the words needed to be spoken, needed to exist in the air, solid and real. Luther had always sat at the head of the table during business meetings, always positioned himself between me and whoever we were meeting with, as if I needed protection. As if I couldn't hold my own in a conversation about logistics and freight rates and tonnage. I'd let him believe that. For 31 years, I'd let him believe I didn't understand the business that bore his name. But tomorrow I would walk into that office as myself. I stood and moved to the window, pressing my palm against the cool glass. The river below caught the sunlight, fracturing it into 1,000 moving pieces. When I'd looked at this view this morning, it had seemed like a barrier. The water dividing one side of the city from the other, keeping things separate. Now it looked like a path forward. I pulled out my phone. The screen lit up with notifications, news alerts, messages from Celeste's office, emails from the bank. I scrolled past all of them until I found the contact I was looking for. Bryn Lockwood, mobile. I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. Mrs. Garrison. Just my name. No question in it. As if he'd been expecting me to reach out. Bryn, I said. I'll be in the office tomorrow morning. Can you prepare the fleet report? A pause. Then, yes, ma'am. We'll be waiting. All of us. All of us. The drivers. The dispatchers. The people who'd kept Garrison Freight and Logistics running while Luther built his second life. The people who'd chosen loyalty over convenience. All 63 trucks, I said. I know where they are. I always have. Another pause longer this time. When Bryn spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been relief, or vindication, or both. I know you do, ma'am. How many times had I stood in that office pretending not to understand tonnage and roots, while Luther explained them like I was a child? How many times had I nodded along while he drew diagrams on the whiteboard, acting as if I'd never seen a supply chain map before? I'd managed the household finances for 31 years. I'd tracked every expense, every investment, every dollar that moved through our accounts. Did he really think I wasn't also tracking the trucks? The routes, the profit margins. I'd known about the company's cash flow problems in 2019. I'd known when he renegotiated the insurance contracts. I'd known when he bought the new warehouse in Gary, Indiana. I'd known everything. I just hadn't let him see that I knew. Tomorrow, I told Bryn. 9 a.m. conference room. We'll be ready, he said. And Mrs. Garrison, thank you. He hung up before I could ask what he was thanking me for. I slipped the phone back into my purse and took one last look around the VIP room. The mahogany table, the leather chairs, the floor-to-ceiling windows with their view of a city that had watched Luther Garrison rise and fall in the span of a single day. I picked up my coat from the chair, the armor I no longer needed, and walked to the door. The hallway was empty, my footsteps muffled by carpet as I moved toward the elevator. The lobby downstairs would be clear by now, the reporters gone, the cameras packed away, the spectacle over. I pressed the button and waited. The following months wouldn't be easy. There would be court dates and depositions and endless paperwork. There would be reporters asking questions and lawyers negotiating terms and probably 100 complications I hadn't even thought of yet. But I would know where I stood, on solid ground, in my own name, with my own authority. The elevator arrived. I stepped inside. As the doors closed, my phone buzzed in my purse. Once, twice. I pulled it out. A news alert filled the screen. Luther Garrison arraignment scheduled prosecution calls it biggest corporate fraud case in Chicago this decade. I scrolled past it. Underneath, another notification waited. A voicemail icon. A number I hadn't seen in years. My finger hovered over the play button. The elevator descended, carrying me down from the 12th floor, where theory had become handcuffs, where plans had become justice, where the woman I'd pretended to be for 31 years had finally stepped aside for the woman I'd always been. I pressed play. The voice on the other end made my breath catch. Someone from before Luther, before the marriage, before I'd become Mrs. Garrison. Someone who knew the woman I used to be. I listened to that voicemail 3 times before deleting it. Some voices belonged to the past, and I had a future to build. The judge's gavel fell on a Tuesday morning in June, and Luther pleaded guilty to all charges without looking at me once. I wasn't there. Celeste sent me the transcript later that afternoon. 12 counts: wire fraud, tax evasion, fraudulent asset transfer, conspiracy to commit financial crimes. Luther James Garrison, age 64, entered a guilty plea to every single one. 12 years federal prison, $18 million in restitution. All marital rights terminated. I read the numbers sitting at my desk in the office that used to be his. 12 years. I turned 62 in April. Luther would be 76 when he got out, if he got out. The prison sentence felt abstract until I realized I was older than the punishment itself. The dominoes fell quickly after that. Cook County invalidated every document Preston Dalton had notarized during his suspension: the divorce petition, the property transfer, the power of attorney. All of it void. On July 15th, a courier arrived at my door with the Lincoln Park house deed my name only. Pearl Garrison. Not Pearl and Luther. Just Pearl. Preston lost his notary license permanently. He repaid the $400,000 in fees. Celeste said he avoided jail time by cooperating with federal investigators testifying against Luther in exchange for leniency. I didn't attend that hearing either. Sloan Whitfield received 9 years. The Florida case reopened charges of identity fraud and conspiracy dating back to 2018. Her Cayman Islands account remained frozen, the contents seized and applied toward restitution. She would be 60 when she walked free. If anyone was waiting for her on the other side, I never found out. Dr. Forrest Mercer lost her medical license permanently. 3 years probation. The fake cancer diagnosis that had started everything is now the centerpiece of her professional destruction. I wondered if she thought about me when she signed the settlement papers. If she remembered the woman, she'd look her in the eye and be sentenced to death with fabricated test results. Wade Bentley, the coroner who'd signed Luther's fraudulent death certificate, received 5 years. Celeste said he cried during sentencing. I didn't watch any of it happen. The day of Luther's formal sentencing, the moment when the judge would officially declare his punishment and he would be taken into custody, I had a choice. I could sit in that courtroom and watch the man I'd spent 31 years married to lose everything. Or I could be somewhere else. I chose somewhere else. 4 new company contracts waited on my desk. Distribution agreements with manufacturers in Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. Routes I'd planned. Rates I'd negotiated. Companies that wanted to work with Garrison Freight and Logistics because of the reputation we'd built, not the scandal we'd survived. 4 signatures that meant more than watching him lose everything, because he'd already lost. The rest was just paperwork. July arrived with humid heat and afternoon thunderstorms. The city smelled like hot pavement and lake water. I worked long days at the office learning systems I'd always understood but never controlled. Bryn and the other drivers treated me with careful respect that gradually softened into something warmer. Trust, maybe, or recognition. The first Friday night in July, I came home to find Hayes sitting on my front steps with takeout bags. "I know you don't want to cook tonight," he said. "Thai food, okay?" We ate at the dining room table, the same table where I'd served 1,000 family dinners over 3 decades. But this felt different. Lighter. The first meal at home without an agenda since last October. Hayes told me about his new project at work, some software architecture problem I only half understood. I told him about the Wisconsin contract, the negotiations that had taken 6 weeks, but finally closed. Then he set down his fork and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Are you really okay?" he asked. I could have said yes. Could have smiled and changed the subject. Could have kept the walls up the way I'd learned to do during all those years of pretending I didn't notice things. Instead, I told him the truth. That night in October, I said quietly, when I found the USB in the storage unit, I wore his jacket because it was cold, and I thought. My voice caught. I thought it still smelled like him, like the man I'd married. But it didn't. It just smelled like dust and mothballs and old fabric. And that's when I knew. Before I even looked at the files on that USB, I knew the person I'd loved was already gone. Hayes reached across the table and took my hand. "I'm sorry I wasn't there that night," he said. "You were here during more important times," I told him, and I meant it. We washed dishes together afterward, Hayes scrubbing while I dried the same division of labor we'd had when he was 10 years old and insisted on helping. He hummed something under his breath, some song I didn't recognize, and I realized this was what healing looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments. Just ordinary routines that used to be impossible. "I should head out," Hayes said, drying his hands on the towel. Then he paused. "Unless would it be weird if I crashed on your couch tonight? I'm too tired to drive." "Guest room," I corrected. "And it wouldn't be weird at all." I gave him spare blankets and towels, said goodnight at the top of the stairs, closed my bedroom door, and lay in the darkness listening to the house settle around me. Everything had changed. Nothing had changed. The next morning, I woke to the smell of coffee. I came downstairs in my robe to find Hayes in the kitchen humming that same tune from last night, flipping pancakes with the easy confidence of someone who belonged here. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Hope you're hungry." I poured myself coffee from the pot he'd already brewed, exactly the right strength, exactly the way I liked it, and sat at the kitchen counter watching him cook. He plated the pancakes, set them in front of me with syrup and butter, sat down across from me with his own plate. And I realized there was one more conversation we hadn't had yet. We talked that morning about what came next. Hayes had been offered a promotion, more responsibility, more travel. He wanted to know if I'd be okay alone. I told him the truth, I'd been alone for years. Now I was just admitting it. August arrived like a promise kept. The name on the door hadn't changed, but the woman walking through it had. Garrison Freight and Logistics. Black letters on frosted glass. The same logo that had been there when Luther incorporated the company 31 years ago. The same address. The same building with its freight elevator and loading dock and break room that always smelled like burnt coffee. But this time I walked through that door as the sole owner. Not co-owner, not bookkeeper, not the CEO's wife who handled the paperwork while he made the real decisions. Sole owner. The staff had gathered in the main office, 11 people total. Dispatchers, logistics coordinators, accountants, Bryn. They looked at me with expressions that ranged from curious to cautious to something that might have been relief. I walked through the room, stopping at each desk, shook hands, asked questions, listened to answers. Martha in accounting had been with the company for 19 years. She told me about her daughter's college acceptance letter, Northwestern full scholarship. I congratulated her and made a note to send flowers. John in dispatch had 3 grandchildren now. He showed me pictures on his phone, his weathered hands carefully swiping through images of gap-toothed smiles and birthday cakes. Bryn appeared at my elbow with a coffee cup. Exactly the right temperature. Exactly the way I liked it. He said nothing, just nodded once and returned to his desk. I stood at the window overlooking the freight yard and pulled up the GPS fleet tracker on my tablet. 63 trucks moving along interstate routes I'd helped map over 3 decades. Indiana, Ohio, Wisconsin, Illinois. The arteries of commerce flowing through the Midwest, carrying goods from manufacturers to distributors to the stores, where people like me bought their groceries and furniture and ordinary lives. I'd always known where these trucks were. Every route, every driver, every delivery schedule. Luther thought I tracked household expenses while he ran the business. He was wrong about a lot of things. I reviewed the 3 expansion contracts waiting on my desk, new clients who wanted our services, new routes that would require more trucks, more drivers, more coordination. The numbers made sense. The projections were solid. I signed all 3. Bryn knocked on the office door, my office now, not Luther's, and stepped inside with a file folder. "The Wisconsin route is locked in," he said. "We'll need 2 additional trucks to handle the volume. I can have them operational by October." "Good." I tapped the GPS display. 63 trucks. I want 70 by December. He nodded, making notes on his clipboard. Then he hesitated. "I've been thinking, should we redesign the company logo? New era, new look." I looked at the nameplate on my desk. Garrison Freight and Logistics. Pearl Garrison owner. "That name was mine from the beginning," I said. "It stays." Because it was true. Luther had incorporated the company, but I'd been the one who suggested the name, the one who filed the paperwork, the one who kept the books and tracked the routes, and made sure payroll cleared on time while he networked and sold and built relationships. Sole owner. 2 words that used to terrify me. Now they just sounded like the truth. September came with cooler temperatures and shorter days. The leaves in Lincoln Park started turning edges, curling brown and gold. 2 months had passed since May 10th. 2 months since the Langham. Since handcuffs clicked shut and federal agents led Luther away, and I walked out into sunlight that felt like vindication. I sat at my home desk on a chilly Thursday evening with a blank sheet of paper in front of me. There were things I'd wanted to say at the Langham, things I couldn't say with Celeste and Hayes and federal agents watching, things that existed in the space between evidence and emotion, between strategy and grief. So I wrote a letter to Luther. I wrote about the 31 years, the garage where we'd lived when we first got married, when money was tight and dreams were cheap, the beer cans on the coffee table, the morning coffee ritual, 2 cups exactly the way we liked them. The quiet intimacy of knowing someone's rhythms better than your own. I wrote about Hayes, about watching him grow up with a father who loved him, but taught him that love was something you could weaponize. I wrote about October 2022, the fake diagnosis, the papers I signed, the hospice room where I'd prepared to die while he prepared to disappear. And then I asked the only question that mattered. When did you start seeing possessions instead of seeing me? I stared at that sentence for a long time. No answer exists. Maybe that's the answer. I folded the letter carefully, carried it to the kitchen sink, struck a match. The paper caught flame edges curling, first blackening like autumn leaves, transforming into something that couldn't hurt me anymore. The fire crawled across my handwriting, consuming words I'd never send, questions that would never be answered. 31 years reduced to ash. Smaller than I expected. Just a few sheets of paper. Nothing more. Nothing less. I turned on the faucet. The ashes swirled in the water, breaking apart, disappearing down the drain. I washed the sink clean. Dried it. Put the dish towel back in its place. Some things once done are done, I said to the empty kitchen. I stood there watching the last traces of gray wash away, and realized something. I hadn't thought about Luther in 3 days. Not once. Not his voice. Not his face. Not the weight of 31 years pressing against my chest. 3 days of living without that absence taking up space in my mind. The absence of that absence, that's when healing really begins. I turned off the light and walked upstairs. Tomorrow I had a meeting with the Wisconsin client. Next week the new trucks would arrive. In December we'd hit 70 vehicles and I'd start planning for 80. In 4 months everything would look different again. And I would be there to see it. 4 months passed like turning pages. January 2024 arrived with the first snow of the season, fat flakes drifting past my living room window, coating Lincoln Park in white silence. Exactly 1 year since that night in the cold storage unit when I'd worn Luther's jacket and found the USB that changed everything. But this time I watched the snow through glass, wearing a coat that actually fit. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. Hayes stood on the porch, stamping snow from his boots, his cheeks red from the cold, holding a small gift box wrapped in plain brown paper. I wasn't sure about the size, he said, stepping inside and handing me the box. I unwrapped it slowly. Inside lay a winter coat, navy blue wool, clean lines, simple brass buttons. The same shade as the suit I'd worn to the Langham on May 10th. No card, no explanation. None needed. I lifted it from the box and slipped it on. It fit perfectly. Hayes smiled, not his usual careful smile, but something warmer. Looks good. We sat in the living room drinking coffee and watching the snow fall, just like we used to when he was little. The silence between us felt comfortable now. Not weighted with unspoken things, but simply quiet. "Do you miss Dad?" he asked. The question hung in the air like the snowflakes outside, delicate, inevitable, impossible to avoid. I thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the man I thought was Dad," I said finally. "The one who made pancakes on Saturday mornings, who taught you to ride a bike, who used to bring me coffee before I even got out of bed." I paused, choosing my words carefully. That man, I still remember him. But I don't know if he ever really existed or if I just needed him to. Hayes nodded slowly. "I think he existed, at least for a while. Before he stopped. Before he chose something else. Before he chose himself," I said, "over everything else." We sat with that truth until the coffee went cold. Hayes left at 8 p.m., hugging me at the door before pulling on his own winter coat and stepping out into the snow. I watched from the window as his car pulled away from the curb, taillights disappearing around the corner. The same corner where Luther's taxi had vanished 15 months ago. Same corner, same snow, different woman watching. My alarm went off at 5:30 the next morning, a 20-year habit I'd never broken. The house was still dark, still cold, but I pulled on the navy blue coat and drove through empty streets to the office. The building stood silent when I arrived. No other cars in the lot yet. Just me and the freight trucks lined up in the yard, their chrome bumpers catching the first hint of dawn. I unlocked the door and climbed the stairs to my office, turned on the lights, booted up the computer, pulled up the night fleet report. The GPS screen glowed in the dim room, 63 trucks moving along interstate routes I knew by heart. I-80 through Indiana, I-90 across Wisconsin, I-55 down to St. Louis. Red dots crawling across the map like blood cells through arteries, keeping the company alive. I'd tracked these trucks for 31 years. Every route, every driver, every delivery schedule. Luther thought he'd built this company while I managed household expenses. How many mornings had I arrived at 5:30 a.m. thinking he built this company when I was the one who kept it alive? The expansion plan sat in a folder on my desk, 7 new trucks contracts, already negotiated routes, already mapped. I opened it and signed my name on the final page. Pearl Garrison owner. 70 trucks by June. I knew exactly where they'd go, which routes needed additional capacity, which drivers were ready for more responsibility, which clients had been waiting for us to expand so they could increase their orders. I'd always known. The sun rose slowly over Chicago orange light spilling across the skyline. I stood at the window with my coffee made exactly the way I liked it, no one else's preferences to consider, and watched the city wake up. 1 year ago, I'd stood in a freezing storage unit wearing a dead man's jacket, believing my life was over. 6 months ago, I'd walked into the Langham Hotel wearing a navy blue suit, carrying 42 days of careful planning and a contract that would trap the man who'd tried to erase me. 4 months ago, I'd burned a letter I would never send and watched 31 years wash down the drain in ashes. And now I stood in an office with my name on the door, watching trucks I'd always tracked move along routes I'd always known, running a company I'd always managed. The only thing that had changed was my willingness to see it. Luther was the co-founder, but I was the one who kept the books balanced, who maintained the client relationships, who knew every driver's name and every truck's maintenance schedule, who arrived at 5:30 a.m. for 20 years while he slept until 7. He'd built the framework, but I'd built everything inside it. And when he tried to take it all away, tried to make me sign my life over to him while he faked his death and ran away with stolen money and a woman half his age, he made one critical error. He assumed I didn't know my own worth. He assumed I couldn't survive without him. He assumed wrong. I finished my coffee and set the mug down on my desk. The GPS screen still glowed, 63 red dots moving steadily forward. By June there would be 70. By next year, maybe 80. I would be here to see it happen. Not as Luther's wife. Not as the woman who'd been too afraid or too loyal or too naive to see what was right in front of her. Just as myself. What I needed 31 years to realize is that I never needed him to understand myself. I turned off the office light as the sun finished rising over Chicago. The GPS screen glowed in the dawn, 63 trucks moving forward just like me. I picked up my keys, locked the door behind me, walked out into January morning air that smelled like snow and coffee and new beginnings. I knew exactly where I stood. And for the first time in 31 years, that was all I needed to know. And to you, listening to my story, remember this. Betrayal doesn't define you, but how you respond to it does. For 31 years, I made the mistake of trusting blindly instead of paying attention to what was right in front of me. I ignored the small inconsistencies, the moments that didn't quite add up. Don't make my mistake. Trust, yes, but verify. Love, absolutely, but keep your eyes open. I wish I'd been brave enough to ask the hard questions earlier. Stories like mine, revenge cheating stories, where someone fights back and reclaims what was stolen, they're not just about getting even. They're about remembering your own worth when someone tries to erase it. I believe God put me through this trial for a reason, to show me I was stronger than I ever knew, and to remind others that justice, though delayed, still arrives. The lesson isn't about revenge. It's about refusing to disappear when someone wants you gone. These revenge cheating stories we share on her vengeance aren't celebrations of anger, they're testimonies of survival and strength. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you faced betrayal? Did you fight back or walk away? Your perspective matters. And if you know someone who needs to hear this message that they're stronger than they think, please share this with them. Subscribe to Her Vengeance for more stories of resilience and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time means everything to me. One final note: while this story contains fictionalized elements for storytelling and reflection, the emotions and lessons are real. What matters is the message you carry forward.